Inka, Daniel, welcome again to talk number 6, 5, 6.
Yes, six. It's six. Thank
Crazy.
you very much.
It's great to talk to you guys again. As always, I feel like these conversations are very illuminating, and they are a very important topic in general for our society. So it's great to talk to you guys. There's a lot of questions that I've been kind of mulling over as always on these topics. Danny and I talked a little bit in with Inka about and on the chat discussing what topics that we could talk about, and I think we talked about delving deeper into relationships and how our dynamics are affected and kind of played out because of our traumas. So I think that's something that would be great to talk about. And if it's okay, I have a question for you guys that I think is very it could be a good topic to start. And it's a simple question, and it's this: true or false? To feel is to heal, right? Do you guys agree with that? And if so, if not, what are your thoughts on that phrase?
I would answer with a definite maybe, because a lot of modalities that use feeling, and I could cite breath work for myself, almost got it right, but then we come into this topic of A, is it really the kind of trauma that can be healed by just feeling it? B, does the person know how to be in the body? And C, do they know how to get to the origin of the trauma?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm calling it trauma because that's what needs healing in the modality that I'm using, that we call anything that needs healing, as you just said, to feel is to heal. In our terms, is basically a trauma.
Got it.
So for everybody who just joined in number 6 and hasn't heard all the first 5 parts, we from the Institute for the Study of Peak States define trauma as everything which is not feeling calm, peaceful, and emotionally light. And healing would be the part where we resolve these issues so we feel calm, peaceful, and emotionally light, which we abbreviate with CPL. So you might hear us talk about CPL. That refers to a moment in your life when you don't feel any trauma, when you resolve the trauma that was activated right now.
Mm-hmm.
And Sergio, I like this phrase because it shows a little bit from my point of view where we stand in society.
Correct.
If we use the phrase to feel is to heal, and we listen to Inka, and Inka has worked with trauma healing techniques for over a decade now, almost a decade and a half, I guess, right, Inka?
Yeah, I think we're getting in the area where counting would be impolite, so.
Yeah. So, wonderful. But she is already deep in this field, in this topic, when the sentence "to feel is to heal," from my point of view, addresses people at the beginning of the path of the journey.
Yes.
Okay, because in our Western societies, feeling or emotions are usually something we disregard. Okay, not really. Good emotions like being happy, smiling, is stuff they sell with the products on TV and magazines. So you always see a smiley face. Okay, so good emotions is something that our society strives for,
Mm-hmm.
and these good emotions can be bought by a house, a boat, a nice partner, or whatever, or a beautiful body and a training and even food products which are generated by computers and stuff like this. So emotions usually are addressed when they're positive, and when they're negative, they're usually avoided, they're swept under the rug, they are tried to be ignored, or stuff like this.
Right.
So when we look at that point, at a person who's in that point, who doesn't even really know what his or her emotions are, and might just feel a bodily sensation, like a pressure, okay, but doesn't know that this has to do with the grieving process he or she is right in because a year ago, whoever was close to her died, then to feel is to heal would bring that person on a path where we basically bring that person in a state where we say, feeling is okay. When you're feeling sad, you have all the right in the world to feel sad. Usually, I observe that in kindergarten or even in school or later in the workplace, we are shamed for our emotions. Don't feel this way. This is not correct. Oh, you don't need to feel sad right now, or something like this. So there are many, many phrases said by others to the person who has an emotional reaction that are implying that emotions are not good. They're invalidating the emotional state. And the interesting thing is when you work many, many years in the field with emotions and therapy and so on, you get a shift of your perspective slowly where you say, no, facts are actually something which can be faked, which can be turned, which can be twisted, and emotions are the only real thing we have. Okay? And this means basically when we say to feel is to heal, technically, if we have a whole perspective of the whole healing process, that's not correct. But if we just look for the start, to feel is the start of your healing journey, I would completely say, yes, that's very good from where our society stands for. If somebody listens to that recording in 10 years, I hope this is invalid. And we don't need that sentence anymore because everybody got this emotional intelligence and knows what emotions are and knows how to deal with emotions. And at least that's my vision. And then we wouldn't talk about that sentence.
Okay. Thank you for those points. It sounds like a very confusing topic. I mean, it sounds extremely nuanced and very subtle because, so correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like to feel is to heal is the beginning stages of this process. It is an important part of being able to stay, to be aware of what's going on within you. If you're actually feeling it inside, if you're actually feeling these things, like Inka was saying, if you're in your body, which is another very important aspect that most people may not be aware of. But it's not the end all, it's not the solution. It's not trauma. And I think that's another, this question I asked you guys, or where I got this question for, sentence, you guys might have heard it before. It's from, it's used a lot in the trauma field. I think I heard it somewhere in a book regarding, I think it was EMDR. It could have been somatic experiencing, but it's, that's one of the most powerful sentences you hear, right? To feel is to heal, which says that, the way I've always taken it has been like that. I feel sadness for something that happened, and if I can stay with it, then poof, it'll just go away. It seems like that's not the case, though, right?
Well, it depends on where the sadness comes from. We discussed in the previous episodes, we discussed that there are different types of trauma, or that the Institute for the Study of Peak States identified different types of traumas, and that there are also direct traumas or structural traumas. And so if the sadness is a result out of a structural trauma, just feeling it won't resolve it. But if it's a direct trauma, it's a biographical trauma, just being in the body, feeling it, accepting it, might solve it. Okay, and so the might is here the part, and I like that very much about the Institute for the Study of Peak States. They not only created a healing modality, which is pretty easy when you get the basics out of it. You can even do that on your own at home. But and there are books published explaining this as well. And now I lost my train of thought. Sorry. Where were you saying?
We're talking about how simple or complicated it is to heal by feeling. We're talking about biographical traumas maybe being something that can be...
Yes. So, right. And so the Institute for the Study of Peak States created a model of how trauma and how the psyche and how the biology interact. Mm-hmm. And you don't necessarily need to use the Institute's techniques. You can, with that model, you can use any technique, any trauma healing technique. You mentioned too, EMDR, somatic experience, mm-hmm. or just EFT tapping. When you go through, and then the end point is to feel that calm, peaceful, and feeling light. Okay? So the Institute doesn't say that this is the only thing you can do and there's nothing else and this is the best. No, it's just a model. And within that model, you can use any techniques and you will be successful when these techniques bring you to that calm, peaceful, and light. From my experience, patients or clients are already pretty happy when there's an emotion, and we rate that in SUDS rating. So that means from 0, nothing, to 10, the most complicated, most dangerous feeling, most critical feeling. So if they have an 8 out of 10, and then they, with whatever technique, go down to 4, that's already a relief for the client.
Right.
From our point of view, this is not really helpful because that is still trauma. It's mm-hmm. just not that intense anymore. And it still blocks the metabolic pathway and it keeps you away from functioning better.
Correct.
Okay, so for the client, beautiful. Yeah. From the point of view of getting you to a better state, not helpful if you just decrease the load. You just want to get to a real CPL.
Right. Not good enough. Got it. Got it. Okay. So, I'm taking the stance of right now, as I'm talking and asking these questions, of people who maybe not, are at the maybe beginning stage of their journey of healing, are just curious about the topic, and maybe have these questions, or may not even have these questions, or know how to ask them, but would be interested. So, with that being said, this next question I have is, what's the difference between this word we've been hearing for a long time, and we've already talked about it, but I thought we could talk about it a little bit more. This word, catharsis, and healing trauma, right? We've talked about catharsis because it's been in the literature for a long time. It's almost a common word as well. Why is it that when we reach catharsis, we're not healing? I mean, we're deep into that feeling. We're so deep into it, we have to express it one way or another. So why are we not getting better from that feeling, or from that feeling that's obviously stuck with us, and we need to let it out? What's happening there?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure that I understood your question right. So I'll just try, and please join in if I'm going in the wrong direction. So catharsis means the process of releasing and thereby providing relief from a strong and repressing emotion.
Okay.
So basically, if you have an 8 out of 10 emotion and you go down to a 4 or 3 out of 10, that already would meet the definition of catharsis. I'm not sure. Sari, is that what you mean, or what do you mean with catharsis?
I guess I've always taken catharsis as this idea that we might have kind of like an expression of a certain feeling, but it doesn't mean we've healed anything. It kind of means we kind of expressed it, or we felt it, or we cried about something, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't mean that feeling or that event that made us feel that way doesn't come back. It's almost like a valve. That's the way I've seen it. I think about it, at least. almost like a valve, like you're loosening a valve and a lot of pressure's coming out. But ultimately, you know, the pressure will build up again. That's how I've understood catharsis as. But I could be wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, well, my experience of catharsis, for example, is with the breath work. Yeah, like you're encouraged to externalize the inner feeling. And if, for example, if there's a lot of anger, you might just be bashing some cushions or something. Yeah.
Right.
That kind of catharsis is what I know. Yeah, and a lot of modalities use actually props to encourage you to get it out of your system. Again, like what I mentioned before, you might want to know a little bit more about it as a therapist to guide people so that they're not re-traumatizing themselves with that, basically.
Got it.
So I would like to give you an example. If there's a client, and that client as a child has made the experience, for example, physical punishment whenever that client felt anger. Okay, and perhaps the parents also said something to that client when he or she was a kid, like, you have no right to anger, or your anger, I will stop your anger by punishing you, I'm beating you up, or something like this. Mm-hmm. So this kid will learn very quickly that expressing anger will end up in pain. Mm-hmm. So internally, that kid will now start to create different ways to handle emotions, because anger is not okay. But anger is a normal emotion which might come up when somebody steals your burger at whatever burger chain restaurant. Okay,
correct.
Then the first moment is there needs to be anger, and then your body gets activated, and then you just do what is necessary in that situation, and then you should go back to normal. Okay, so the emotion of anger, when it's not stuck, when it's not always present, has to do something with the situation. So anger per se is not a bad emotion. Just if I'm sitting on the sofa and nothing happens, and then I'm getting angry and that I'm destroying my sofa, then anger is non-functional or dysfunctional. But when somebody steals my burger, then there's anger is okay. But now when this client learned that anger is not okay, that client will now not externalize the anger, but internalize the anger. And if that happens very often, then it's very probable that this client will develop some sort of psychosomatic disease. And then he or she will go to the doctor, and the doctor will see, okay, you have acid reflux or whatever, or you have some pain in the leg or whatever that psychosomatic disease is, and the doctor will treat the somatic symptoms.
Right.
Because neither the doctor nor the client will know where this comes from. Now, if you go in therapy, and if you're a good therapist, you might very quickly discover that this client has a problem with expressing anger, because anger is, in certain situations, a normal reaction. And then you will go there and will try to uncover what the problem is. And the initial problem was that the client was beaten up. You will heal that trauma, and then you will be able to get relief to the client. Well, so for that client, in the first stage, expressing anger is already a relief. But it doesn't mean that the trauma, when the kid was hit by the parents, is resolved. Okay, so for the client, because all of the stuck anger is in, so if you give him a pillow and you allow him to express the anger, first of all, the client needs to learn that anger is okay, needs to understand what happens in the body, and that this is emotion of anger, and that you cannot only externalize it because that he or she has done for 30 plus years, but that it can be expressed. And so this really helps the client. The client feels better, but the psychosomatic disease might not go away. It's just a little bit of relief.
Mm-hmm.
And now if you have a trauma therapist who knows about these things and knows about CPR and knows how to resolve trauma, he might go further and might resolve the trauma which caused all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And then the client will probably feel much, much better.
Okay. So it sounds like they're almost like steps to wellness. So, there's a spectrum to how good you can feel, or how, taking away that negativity or those negative emotions. And there's a spectrum from, or these steps to get there. And it seems like catharsis is an important one, but not necessarily the end goal, or what, the full extent of the healing process. So it's an important one, but it's not the end of it.
To what we understand right now, I would agree, and it's not finalized. Okay, perhaps in the next 5 to 10 years there's more knowledge, but right now this is something which I can live with, and I call this a path. Okay, it's not steps, because it's a path, and if you just go on that path and you just walk some steps and then you feel better and you want to take a rest because life is so busy and so on, that's fine. If you get off that path, there's the big probability that you might feel unwell again soon. But if you continue going that path, that should be for each and every one of us to get better, to feel better, to have experienced life in a more functional and more fun way.
Of course, that's the whole point, right? Okay. Well, thank you for answering that. I mean, that's something that I personally, try to understand better. And I know what you're talking about in terms of somatic, in terms of breath work, Inca, because I remember when I did breath work for about, I did like a 10-day retreat, and that was one thing, and that was actually that was probably the toughest part, like trying to express what you were feeling in your body through these kind of movements. It was very it was encouraged to do those kinds of things, like to move the way your body wanted to move, and sometimes it was very erratic and weird, and to kind of express it through like these guttural sounds, and it was pretty intense, to be honest. But I think that was an interesting aspect. It was a weird aspect from somebody who'd never done that before, but yeah, it was encouraged so that you would allow yourself to kind of let deeper feelings kind of come out or become more expressed. So that was interesting. Let's see. Okay, on to the next question. Can we talk a little bit more about dynamics within relationships? And we've done it a bit, but just a little bit more. Our traumas affect how we see the world and how we behave. We have these words, about somebody offending us or triggering us. Sometimes we project our insecurities and our pains onto other people. There's the idea that we do it a lot easier with people that we trust, so like our families. And there's also the fact that, sometimes we expect people to change so that our relationships can be better. And, that's a big topic because we want people to change. We also want to change so that we are not affected by our relationships in certain ways, especially if people can't change or won't change. So, what happens, or how much control do we have, and what happens in a relationship when we start healing? And, this could be our parent or our friend or our boss or our relationship to ourselves. What are things that you've seen that can happen when people start healing anything, from if you could give some examples with biographical or generational trauma or anything, what are things that you've seen that maybe a lot of people don't know or that you found to be, very interesting?
Now, Inka, that's something for you, right?
Well, I'm kind of like, I've seen it so many times that for me it's not really a big deal anymore. So essentially, people start usually out with the idea that whatever's outside of them, their environment, is causing their feelings, right?
Right.
Yeah. So then it follows, in that kind of weird thinking, if you're having problems with other people, then they need to change. And
correct.
that's so it turns out that's just not the case. And I think I've even come across a couple of books that encourage people to work in that direction. I don't quite get the title, anything, something like the best person to marry is yourself, or something like that. That acknowledges that essentially whenever you are having problems in your partnership, it's a lack of self-love, and basically feelings that are attributed to the cause being outside you but affecting you.
Okay.
Does that sound like a proper English sentence? I don't know if the grammar.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense.
If I lost the grammar along the way. Okay.
But you're saying that the book states that if there's something going on in a relationship, it's because of you. It's because you don't love yourself enough. Is that what the book was saying?
Oh, I just read the title and I thought, yeah, that's a really cool title, because there's a lot of truth to that. Yeah, you need to be loving yourself first. And you need to be clear that your environment is not the actual cause of your feeling. That's just a trigger. And it triggers something that's already inside you. Now, the trick is to figure out what kind of problem is being triggered. Is it a projection, as we talked about? Is it a codependency trauma? That we can also take a look into, the kind of problem where they tie into each other. They're complementary traumas, so to speak. So one trauma gets triggered by a person that is also in a trauma, and they play it out. Those are the most common problems that I see in relationships.
When you say play it out, what do you mean?
If you have this kind of complementary trauma, it's incredibly hard to stop yourself from doing another round of that one.
You just, because both of you are having something going on, it's very hard to step away from it. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Can you give some examples? I'm a little bit lost. So.
I'm trying to find one that really gets people into this trap of never-ending ping pong game of trauma. The most common one is probably this closeness and distance dance, I can almost call it, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Where one partner says, you're suffocating me, it's too much, you want too much from me, and blah, and I need my freedom, and by the way, I'm off to visit my friend for a couple of days, and you see me when you see me. And the other person doesn't get enough closeness, which they need to feel safe. Yeah. So they want to be able to express their love in very physical ways. Maybe definitely they can't handle it well if the other person is just off, and leaves them in the lurch, so to speak. So what happens is that usually the person who wants the closeness is deprived so much that at some point they decide, well, let's forget about this whole thing and let's find somebody else who's more interested in having that kind of intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, the next day you will find the person who needed their freedom so urgently right back on your doorstep, because you kind of like released the trauma.
Uh-huh.
And then the other person felt, this is too much freedom. Actually, I just want my freedom if there's somebody to deny it to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not real freedom. It's just the kind of freedom that I feel that I've kind of like won over the other person, or it's something that is, again, trauma based, that works only when there's somebody that in my inner perception denies me that freedom, and then I have to assert I need that freedom, that distance. Right away, when the person says, you know what, and it doesn't even have to be communicated openly. That's the interesting thing. That works across time and space, actually, really.
Mm-hmm.
The moment the person who wants the more intimacy releases that trauma and kind of like gives up, accepts that they won't get that from that person.
Mm-hmm.
The other person said, oh, wait a minute, somebody here, they're actually going to let me be free? No, please, where's my closeness,
Yeah.
Then the dance reverses.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It sounds totally weird and illogical, but they're having something that ties into each other. Or this phenomenon that you see, I think I mentioned it last time, with battered wives that go back to the person who beat them up so badly.
Yeah.
Times and again. This is courting. This is codependency.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is this tied at all to body associations? How we were talking about how somebody, like from a very young age, might have been, physically abused by their parent, but because their parent gave them food and protected them in a way, they tied this feeling of being hurt to being loved or being safe. Does that play into that at all, or accord something completely different?
The cord, as far as I know, the cord doesn't tie to body associations like that. Like it's a different mechanism. The body association itself could cause that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that I need somebody who's actually logically looking at it, that's not a safe person to be with, but my body brain has stored that kind of emotion, the anger and the abuse, as something safe. Yeah, that's a different type of trauma than the cords.
Got it. So if somebody came to you with that situation where, a battered wife who kept going back to their husband, or vice versa, how would, for whatever reason, they came to you, which sounds like, I think that's probably the hardest thing, right? For somebody in that situation to come seeking for help. But what would you do to help that person with the tools that you guys have?
The thing is, if somebody realizes that's what's going on, that's already like a big step. Most of the time, these people don't want to be helped because that would interrupt that kind of dynamic.
Yeah.
Now, if they sense, okay, I have a sense that I might be triggered into going back because we had that so many times before. Yeah. That is where you will say, okay, let's see what we can do about the courting. Is there a body association there, as you just said? Those will be valid points of intervention to help this person.
So the hardest part is really the awareness.
In this particular situation, yes, you need to. I mean, how else would you come to the idea that actually, this is something sick. I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
I'm obviously having a self-damaging behavior here. I need some help.
Okay. Daniel, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, and sorry. By the way, the other end of the cord, the person who's beating and who's aggressive, they're almost as much a victim of the situation because they also can't escape their trauma. So hopefully that person will see that they need help and then find a way to get out of that dynamic. Yeah.
Right. I think that's a very touchy topic. That subject is hard to talk about, and I think, if there's anything that can get, if there's anything that can be extracted from understanding trauma and delving into this perspective and understanding this topic, even if you don't do any healing yourself, I think you can at least get intellectually this knowledge that even people who are being aggressors, even people who have done heinous acts, we're talking about serial killers, there's always a component of emotional damage. And that's not to say like you should condone any of these things, but I think it gives a lot of validity to this idea of how much is evil and how much is just damage, and not, I don't want to say not optimal, but this flaw in optimal human design and what we can be, compassion and love being a very important part of a very healthy human being. So sometimes when I think about people who have hurt me in my life, or when I see situations that are people robbing, people stealing, people doing really painful things to other people, even greater things like we're talking about like the Holocaust and systemic issues and government issues and war, and as a society, as a system, that really is what we are as well, humans. Having the perspective of trauma and what it does, you don't have to feel good about it. You don't have to have a lot of compassion for people, but you can understand where they're coming from, or you can understand a bit more what's happening, and that sometimes can be a very important thing. Even if you're going through a traumatic event yourself and you don't feel safe, and you can't, maybe you're in a toxic environment, if you can understand that it's not you and it's other people as well, it can do a lot of good for you. And that's one thing that I really, really enjoy about learning, especially at the beginning, learning about trauma and learning about, we all have people who have hurt us, and it becomes a lot easier to have compassion when you know that a lot of the times people are doing this because they're hurt, because they're unconsciously doing these things, or they're just, I don't know. It's just an interesting part of learning about all this stuff.
And Sari, thank you. And this is actually where I would like to join in. First of all, we talk about like victim and whatever, somebody who attacked or did whatever wrong. I think it's important to see that there are different levels. Okay, of course, there's the level of physical injury, there's the level of the law, if they did something wrong or right, or if something punishable or not punishable. And then there's the morale and the ethical level. And then there's the level where we try to understand what caused that behavior. That this level is not to justify the behavior in a way regarding the other levels, regarding the law, regarding the ethical and moral level, but it's just to see what mechanisms, what evil mechanisms, what damage caused the person to react or to become an abuser or an attacker. So this is really interesting, and when there is a train of thought or even a train of causes and effects, that does not necessarily mean that this person is not that needs to escape his or her punishment. That's a complete different level of observation.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about trauma and when we talk about behavior, we talk about that level and not necessarily about the law level and legal level. And
not the ethos or anything like that.
Right. So, and that's really interesting. And if someone actually can't differentiate these level, big trouble. Okay, because these level we have to differentiate in our lives these levels. Otherwise, we are not much different from. Well, I'm not comparing now, but that's in our human nature to be able to differentiate different levels and then come to different. Even if you need judgments on each level, so a person might be guilty by the law, but on the level of trauma, it's completely understandable, perhaps, why he or she reacted that way.
Yeah.
Without taking the punishment away. And now getting back to relationships, that was a small thing, but it leads back to relationships because Inka very, very vividly explained how there's a dynamic in the relationship, and it's not always that simple. This is the abuser and this is the victim.
Right.
Okay? Because, and this is now very controversial, no, but partly the victim is also an abuser, okay, because he or she also does something to that other person. And that's something I want to explain. And please don't get me wrong and don't get mad. I'm going to explain it. And again, please see the different levels. I'm not saying if somebody hitting somebody else that this is okay. I'm trying to explain what happens on the behavioral or traumatic or emotional level.
Yeah.
And let's go with person A and person B, so there are no genders involved. Okay, that's gender neutral then.
Yeah.
And so person A does something. Okay, scratches his or her head. Okay, and person B sees that action, and due to the experience that person B has made in his or her life, after conception, after birth, whatever, person B has a reaction to that what person A does.
Right.
So far, no emotions, just a reaction. The reaction of person B is observed by person A, and because that what person B did in the past of person A, after conception, after birth, something happened, triggers an emotion. So person A is remembered to something due to the action of person B. Mm-hmm. And this emotion is something where he or she cannot necessarily think straight again, because every emotion that is triggered, which is above the level of 5 out of 10, that is such rating, usually it's a strong emotion we can't really cope for anymore. Okay? That's why it's above 5. And then this person, for example, gets either into attack mode, it's the fight mode, or the flight mode, or the freeze mode. These are the 3 instincts we have. So when the person A, it doesn't really matter in which mode person A gets. Fight mode is not much worse than flight mode or freeze mode. It doesn't really matter, because the action that person A does, again, might trigger person B, because person B in the past has seen somebody reacting that way as person A reacted, and now person B gets into either fight, flight, or freeze mode. And this, again, triggers something in person A, and that causes a behavior, and that behavior triggers something in person B, and that triggers another behavior, and then you see the circle, and that's basically the escalation of the situation. And at the end, depending on how well these people know each other, depending on how well they were trained, how to react in certain situations, either they're really fighting with words, they're fighting with fists, or they're just silent treatment each other, as the freeze. Whatever happens, this is usually not a healthy relationship.
Right.
Okay, when it escalates in these.
Yeah.
But out of this, and I'm not putting an example here, because these examples usually are not well understood by everybody, because everybody has different experience and reacts differently. So if I put a concrete example and say, okay, somebody scratches his head, of course this is nothing. And why would person B must be crazy to react to scratching at the head? Okay.
Sure.
But there's something else, and that might make it more clear. There are certain cultures where it's considered inappropriate to sit with your legs crossed. Okay.
Right, or show the bottom of your foot.
As a Westerner into these cultures, and you sit with your legs crossed, and you don't know anything about that culture, that is already an offense for the people there. Okay,
Yeah.
so your behavior already is an offense. So you could argue that's rubbish. Yeah, everybody sits with the legs crossed where I come from, but since you went there, it's an offense, and now you basically triggered somebody into an emotional reaction. And that emotional reaction basically triggers something in you, and then the circle goes off.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in the last episode we talked about the ABC model. You could try to avoid that. Okay, and that's
Right.
what all the good intercultural books say. Learn about the culture and avoid these situations. Difficult if it's something cultural, so it's
Yeah.
known, it's basically written down. It's possible. So with a little bit effort and learning and reading, you could try to avoid these situations where you trigger cultural feelings.
Okay.
But every person has a different experience, has a different upbringing. So, and everybody doesn't bring a handbook with him or herself and say, "Here, read my handbook, what triggers me and what not, and please try to avoid this."
Oh man.
Okay, and imagine how many people you meet.
You could only you'd be like you'd be like, I can only meet about 10 people, for like half of my life, and then we'll talk
Yes.
about it afterwards. Yeah, that wouldn't work.
Yes, so society came up with societal rules. Okay,
Yeah.
societal rule number 1: you don't fart when somebody is present. Okay.
Okay.
But in some situations, you have less control or whatever. And but these are societal rules. But these rules change, not necessarily with the farting, but for example, with the addressing people. Okay, to a certain time, it was okay to say Mr. and Mrs. And today, you need to really know how to address somebody by his clothing, by his piercings or whatever, to know if you call him just by the first name, if you call him just by the last name with the Mr. title or whatever. If he's wearing a tie, he wants to address to be sir, and for some people sir is offensive. So that's complicated.
Yeah.
Okay, if you try to accommodate everybody's feelings.
Yeah.
Okay, interestingly, society, especially in the US, to my knowledge, has made this accommodation like now the new it thing. So you have to be, it's considered to be sensitive to everybody so that you accommodate everybody's feelings. But again, then everybody needs to have a handbook handed out and you have to read it.
Right.
I propose the opposite. Knowing this circle, this loop, which I tried to explain. Okay, person A has a behavior, triggers person B. Person B's reaction to that trigger triggers person A. If you want to stop that loop, just check your emotions. And when you have an emotional reaction, if you are not calm, peaceful, and light, do the work. Okay?
Yeah.
Sit down, do the tapping. So person A scratches his head. Person B gets triggered, notices that he or she gets offended by somebody scratching the head. Instead of reacting now to person A again, just say, "Excuse me," go out of the room, do some tapping. When you calm, peaceful, light, you come back, you sit down. Now, since you don't have a reaction, person A might not be triggered. Well, person A might be triggered from you leaving the room, but then person A does something and you're still calm, peaceful, and light, and this circle doesn't evolve. Okay, it stops basically with you. And that's also something what systemic therapy explains, that we are small gears in a big gearbox, and everybody is part. And if one gear changes, basically the whole system changes. So if one person sits there in CPL, then the whole loop doesn't go, and then the dynamic is completely different and more relaxed, yeah, and usually therefore more happy. So whenever we want to interact, we don't need somebody else to change. Okay, that's what we started with. Yeah, though we know that eating ice cream gives us nice feeling in the belly, but it's not in the outside world, it's in the inside world. When we want to make our relationships with other people better, we got to start with us. We got to stop thinking about people to change, but let's change us so we can stay calm, peaceful, light in the interaction with other people.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's not so weird to think about, the scratching of the head. I mean, I think human beings are extremely complex, and I think we all know weird things that might affect us, like for me personally, I mean, like I've talked about it before, but I get, one thing that affects me a lot is like, I'm a very competitive person, and if I don't do that well, it could be anything. It could be something simple. Like if I don't do very well in like something that, showcases my, I don't know, sportsmanship, or not my like sport like ability, I don't know what to call it, then, it triggers something within me. And I'm sure, if somebody like, just recently I was playing a game, and I got very upset. It was a video game, and some friends of mine thought it was funny, and it was funny. Like I obviously like overreacted. I was very upset over a game, and when you're in that state, like it's not a game to you, but they thought it was funny, and I was triggered by the laughter, but it wasn't their fault. Like, and so there are, and I'm sure if this comes from other places, so. I think there are so many things that can trigger you, and they can be nonsensical, but it's like you're saying, those emotions, they don't really care, The truth, the fact of the matter is that, it's affecting you for a reason, and the only thing you can do is just kind of try to change that about yourself, try to fix that so that those things don't affect you, or so that you stop the loop before it even starts. But no, I get that. I get that a lot. And it makes a lot of sense. It seems like
let's play that out if you like. So it's, perhaps we have an example from your friends or something where they had a relationship issue, and we could just play it out.
What do you mean?
Yeah, if you have an example where where your friends had a relationship issue, or you take your example with the video games, and let's see what happened, and where we could stop it, and how we could stop it.
Well, I think one place to stop it, for example, would be this. I don't think I'm the only one. I think a lot of people feel this competitive. I think it's good to be competitive. Right? Like people who play sports, I mean, people who do anything really, but a good example is sports, right? I feel like there's a good number of people who, for whatever reason, are, take competitiveness to the next level. For me, I have a tough relationship with competitiveness because I love being competitive, I love growing, but when I feel like I'm not doing very well at something, or like, I don't know, I could play a sport and I'm just missing shot after shot after shot. Like, let's say tennis. I would get so upset.
Is that just me, or are we losing you?
Can you not hear me?
Now you're back, but for a while it was extremely garbled to non-audible.
Oh, okay. Well, let's try. How about now?
Yeah, now it's better.
Now it's better?
Now it's fine. Fine.
For me, it was always good. So there was one moment where it said there's a problem with the signal, then it faded, and then everything was well.
Okay. Well, I think we're good now.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me say that again, just in case you didn't hear it. For me, it's competitiveness, right? So if I was competitive and I get really angry when I can't do something because of my competitiveness, tennis. I miss shot after shot after shot. I think a good place to stop the loop would be right then and there, right? Because like let's say I took it further. Let's say I was competitive, and then my friends, I got so mad I like broke something, and then my friends thought that was funny, right? And then I could go further, and because they laughed, I could become very angry. And I could be so angry that I lash out at them and I hurt the relationship. And then because because maybe it's happened to me in the past, and that's just how I react when people like laugh at me. And then maybe because they have an experience of having been verbally like attacked before, they react by attacking as well, and maybe even like cussing someone out. So there's already like a ping pong battle right there, like you guys were talking about. So I think one important place to stop something like that would be at the source. For me personally, it would be at the source, right? Like I would not want to, I would want to miss 10 shots playing tennis, or miss my golf swing, and not want to break the club. I think that would be a good place to start. I think that would be an ideal place to kind of nip it in the butt. What do you guys think?
So that's awesome. I mean, I love that example, and you explained the loop beautifully, yeah. And you also painted a picture of what happens basically after you get angry with yourself because you missed the shots, and then your friends laugh at you, and then you break the racket, and then they laugh harder, and then basically now it's the level where you switch into fight, and then you lash out, and then the result is relationship hurt. So beautiful example of the loop. And now when you want to stop it, do you want to stop it after you missed the 10 shots, or do you want to stop it before? And how could you? What did you feel after missing the first one?
I don't know. I don't mind talking about this because I feel like it's an important part of me that I want to actively get better at. I don't know how I feel after missing a couple or one. I feel like a good example for me is like maybe I'll just stay with something that I know I'm very conscious of, and that's like I'll play a shooting game, right? Like Call of Duty, very popular game. I'll be playing in a match with a lot of people, and I just keep getting killed in the game, like 2, 3, 4 times in a row, and I haven't killed anybody. I haven't shot anybody in the game. And by the 5th one, I just get this like surge of anger, and this is where I think of catharsis. What I want to do, and what I usually do, is I hit my control, and that releases some of that anger. But if I were to go on another 5 kill losing streak, I would get angry again. And that's how it plays out. It's not something I'm trying not to get angry, and sometimes I try to control it. But I think for me, maybe when I have that rise in anger, that's where I would want to fix that or heal that, so that I think a good way to describe it is like, I guess some part of me is connected to the worth of how well I do, right? And it just comes out as anger if I don't do that well.
I was about to say, what drives you to do this kind of games in the first place? What's your motivator there? What kind of feeling are you looking for?
Personally, like the games I play with friends. It's about playing as a team. That's important for me. Yeah. But
there seems to be an element of competition there.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. There is. Yeah. A lot of stuff I like to play is competitive stuff, but yeah. I am aware that there's an unhealthy part in that, and I think it's tied to like a sense of worthiness.
So you can see how there are different levels to this, yeah?
Yeah, to an extent.
You can work on the anger, and you can work on what's driving you to play that kind of game in the first place, because that's, as you said, there may not be a purely healthy motivation there. It depends how far you want to take this, yeah? And then it could be that, actually you're mad at yourself for playing this because you were actually hoping to do something else with your time, but you found that you sabotage yourself by playing too long. That's the next level. So you can, look at this in different levels. Yeah. But what you said, like, you can start with the anger and notice that, okay, that's definitely something I want out of my life. How do I do this?
This is a great topic. I like talking about this because I feel like if I can make it personal, then we can go a little deeper into this convo. So you're saying there's more than one level, and to all the things you said, I feel like there is some truth to it. My question is, though, are these considered three different traumas, or like emotional? Are they all separate, or are they tied? And if not, do you have to go one by one and kind of take them out?
In this case, I would say there's probably what we call a core trauma or a core issue behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when you have these chains of traumas or avoidances, that's usually boils down to a core issue or core trauma. And that's like a big trauma that determines your whole view of the world. Yeah, it's something that, and it's normally quite heavily defended. Yeah, so it's not easy to get at it, but it limits your view of the world. There's a filter there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's why it's a good idea to get rid of it, even though you may not directly suffer from any emotional pain. But indirectly, it causes behaviors that are not conducive to a free life or a life without trauma. Yeah.
That's so interesting. And it makes sense. I mean, I don't mind talking about this. I feel like those things
and everybody has them, yeah. So thank you for making yourself naked here a bit, but everybody has that.
That's I mean, that's I'm happy to contribute that. You guys are contributing a lot of gold nuggets. So I mean, you said that, and it makes sense. There are moments where I know that I've neglected other parts of my life to play video games. And I think that's I like talking about video games from a perspective of, this is where the world is going, and I think it's important to talk about, again, limits in terms of, what's healthy and then what becomes an adaptation or a coping mechanism, and I think video games is going to be ripe for the picking in terms of therapeutic assistance, because we are seeing that we're seeing more and more kids play video games. We're seeing a whole economy being built around video games and competitive sports. And it's just going to get bigger in the next 10 years. So yeah, it's happened to me where I know, like, oh, I want to write, I'm working on this song, and rather than finishing the song or continuing the next step of the song, because maybe the song is more complicated or something like that, or I have some kind of limiting belief, I'll use video games to not deal with it. And I'm at the level of awareness, like I'm at the level of, like, I understand that I'm doing this. And I feel like you touched on that topic as well. So that's why I was asking, like, how much of this do I have to just focus on the anger? And if I focus on the anger, everything else gets fixed, or do I need to go deeper? That's something that, intellectually, academically, I don't understand. And personally, I am even more blind to it myself. Like, I have a level, I think most people will have a level of awareness that, what they're doing with their life, in some kind of behavior, is not okay, or, like, I think you can block it to a certain extent, but, for example, like, avoiding your life by binging Netflix, I think most people would know that that's not a good thing. So I think there's a level of awareness most people have, but once you try to get deep into it, I feel like it's mostly masked for everybody, like this, like you're saying, like this core trauma and stuff like that. So that's how I see it right now.
Yeah, Yeah, to answer your questions, actually, dealing with the anger is the first step that you can take, or you can, with the help of somebody who knows how to do this, follow the driving factor of your behavior to its root. Then, by dissolving that root trauma, or core issue, you would not expect to see any other of the behaviors that you came across when you traced that chain back to its roots. Unless there are more core issues that are driving the same behavior. But normally there's a direct relationship between the anger, the competitive games, the overdoing the games, and doing it instead of other things that you were hoping would bring you more enjoyment in life. Yeah.
Yeah.
That whole chain, if you go to the origin of it, to the root of it, you take care of all the rest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
It's a bit like, if you have building blocks and you pile them on top of each other, you pull out the bottom one, the rest of them are also gone.
Right. But there's also I feel like there's also the possibility of overwhelm or, big shifts in your life that you might not be prepared for. Is that something that comes to play when you're talking about resistances and stuff like that? And we've talked about, I don't know if we've talked about it, but I was kind of going through one of the books, the Peak States books, and you guys have a good word for it. I think it's a guarding trauma. So, from that, the idea of sometimes we don't want to change because there's if we change one thing or if we fix one thing, then something else might show up that we're not ready for. Or, is that something that you think plays into these kinds of core traumas as well, or in general?
Well, definitely core traumas are heavily defended just because they might cause such a big shift, yeah?
Yeah.
And because the whole person, they built their whole world around this belief. Now you take that belief away, what am I going to do now? But essentially that, what am I going to do is also just trauma. So you just deal with it and with a trauma healing method of your choice, and that's it. Now the guiding trauma is a slightly different thing because it can happen to basically any trauma. A guiding trauma is what we also call like secondary gain or secondary benefit. That is, the status quo affords you some kind of goodie that would go away once you resolve the trauma.
And I have a beautiful example for that. I heard about a case of somebody who was in quality control in a big manufacturing plant.
Quality assurance,
Quality assurance, yes. And this lady needed to be very, very, very precise in her job.
Yeah.
But she was unhappy. Okay, she was unhappy with her marriage. She was unhappy with her private life, and so on. And then the therapist talked to her and said, "Well, then there seems to be something in your past which causes you to be so perfectionist. Yeah, that's right. And then the lady said, "No, I don't want to deal with it because then I will lose my job and I don't have money and so on." And so basically her unwillingness to do this was, there was more fear about losing the job, of existential threat and so on, as a guiding trauma to this other trauma. So she continued in her suffering.
Yeah.
Though there's no proof that this will happen. Okay. When you learned to be very, very perfectionist, you still can be it. So getting rid of the trauma doesn't need, and we had that already in one of the episodes before, doesn't mean that you can't be perfectionist anymore. But now, after resolving the trauma, you have a choice. Okay, you can be perfectionist, but you don't have to be perfectionist because of the emotion that's standing behind there. But well, her guiding trauma was too strong, and so she didn't do the therapy work. And for core traumas or core issues, as we call them, they are very, very, very personal, and they're personal because they helped the person in the past to survive. At least that's one of my interpretations. that these things form as part of the development, of growing up, of making experiences, and then if a person, for example, has the core issue, I'm worthless, okay, this person obviously, when he or she is an adult, will struggle with life, okay, because this person might overwork, because she or he might just get worse by working too much, depending on the person's preferences. They might have many sexual partners and might attract an STD because they might get their self-worth out of having many partners or whatnot. So the core issue per se doesn't say how the behavior will be, but underneath these different overdoing, unfunctional behaviors or dysfunctional behaviors, there might be the core issue, I'm worthless. Okay, when you go and you resolve that trauma, usually for the person that's a huge relief because a big burden falls off, okay, and then the person still can overdo working or have many partners or whatever, but they don't need to have it. Okay, so they have the memory of how the past was, but a huge relief because this negative motivator is not there.
Right.
But in the beginning, they might, as a child, have used that core issue to gain a better life as a child. Okay, so a person who has that belief might have had a surrounding where being the first was meant to be judged, was meant to be very unpleasant. So the person, him or herself, said, no, I'm worthless, so I'm not the first one raising the hand, I'm not the first one speaking up, so I might not receive corporal punishment or something like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here's the thing, we have a bit an interesting situation, what's the hen and what's the egg? Because in my experience, these beliefs are already inherited. Yeah, so somebody who has the belief, I'm worthless, would react to trigger situations like that. But somebody who doesn't have the belief wouldn't even take that on.
They wouldn't even see it?
Yeah, they wouldn't even what's the problem here?
Yeah.
Okay, somebody else is the one who said something. Okay, next time I'll be the one. Doesn't matter. Yeah. And I don't need to take any actions to prove my self-worth because inherently I know it's there. It's not even a topic.
Interesting.
Yeah. But a lot of people have this kind of inherited stuff in one version or another.
So somebody else early on before them in their family felt unworthy, and then they just pass that feeling that's not even theirs, but it triggers them.
There was some event that translated emotionally into being unworthy, and that got encoded and passed on to the descendants. Yeah.
That is a trip. That's so wild. And I think a lot of people know that. I mean, I didn't expect that last part, but it makes sense if you're talking about generational traumas. I was gonna say something earlier regarding traumas, and I think the way I see it is that, at a very unconscious level, that most people don't want to let go of certain things because whether they are slightly aware or they just kind of get a feeling, they don't want to let go of stuff because it serves a purpose. I think one of the reasons, the way I see it is, let's say somebody feels very unsafe in the world. And so, this trauma protects them when random people show up to talk to them, right? They're very guarded. And if they were to let go, I feel like if people were to let go of certain things, then when they let go of it, there's the idea of well, what's left? What do I have? How am I going to see the world? There's almost like looking forward, there's even more uncertainty. Well, how am I going to feel better, or am I just not going to have this? I'm not going to have this thing protecting me anymore.
Yeah, here's an interesting effect. It is impossible to kind of like skip over the trauma and look what is beyond what would be if I didn't have that.
Okay.
It's really impossible because you're stuck in the thing, and that means you're not having the view of reality as it could be or even as it is. It's all colored through the trauma filter. Yeah.
Interesting.
So when clients ask me,
I was just going to give you an interesting example for that. I had somebody the other day, and she had some trauma on her head that we needed to heal, and she was going into strongly in resistance because if I heal this now, then I'm not going to be as how do you call that in English? Like as curious and as knowledge driven. And I think that's a great thing, and I don't want to lose that. And she was making a hue and a cry, but after a while I was able to convince her that it's okay to heal that. And then the interesting thing is that after we had healed it, she said, oh wow, now I feel I have even more capacity to take on more knowledge.
That's great. That's wonderful.
And you see how she was trying
awesome.
to take out the result, to kind of project the results into the future, and she couldn't do that until she had actually healed it, and then it turned out to be totally different than what she expected.
So yeah, because you're saying that she couldn't really see then what she perceived as the future without it was really the future without it, but with it.
Colored through her trauma.
Yeah. Oh
yeah.
wow!
Somehow our future predicting machine in our head just can do the work with our emotional and trauma setup that we have.
Is it going to see it through? It's just going to see it through that filter.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can't see the future through trauma.
I think
that's what I wanted to say. That's why always for my clients I always say, okay, let's resolve the trauma. And then we reassess the situation. Yeah. We can never reassess the situation on a thinking level. So that's with many talk therapies when they talk and not heal the trauma, you basically just run in circles. Okay?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because you always see the world the way you already see it. But when you heal the trauma and then you really CPL and then you sit down and say, okay, how's the world look like? Oh, and that was a beautiful example that Inka gave. And that's also an example of if you really heal the trauma and get CPL, you get more functional, okay? Because the metabolic pathways are opening up and you gain function.
Makes sense. Yeah, and there's less, you don't have to be managing some kind of pain or some kind of emotional distress, kind of like juggling it with everything else that you want to do or that you got going on in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think one topic
I call that the emotional backpack.
Yeah, exactly. That baggage. Yeah.
I had another example for guiding trauma, for example. Yeah, if somebody comes to me and they have they're so stressed out that they have burnout syndrome and all kinds of things. So they actually are living on insurance benefits. Because they're not in a position to work anymore.
Yeah.
And then they start working with me, and then the guiding trauma comes up. I'm not going to get my insurance benefits. I don't know what kind of job I can get after that. Let me just stay where I am right now.
Yeah.
That's a typical guiding trauma. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Or the guiding trauma where somebody permanently gets sick. Why? Because they don't have any other way to get close to people, and when they get sick, the whole family comes and fusses around them, and takes care of them and nurses them, and they don't get that if they're not sick.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's typical guiding trauma stuff, and actually the last one is even a trigger. It's not even so much a guiding trauma, it's even a trigger to stay sick. Yeah.
Right. I think one good example that I see from my perspective, just because I enjoy writing a lot of music. It's something that comes easy to me, and it's a lot of fun. And I think we're in this, even more so, we're in this era where there's a lot of mental health awareness, and there's a lot of people talking about, which is great. They're talking about, they deal with depression and anxiety and a host of other things that make their lives more difficult. And using music as a platform for that is a wonderful way to do it. I've noticed that, however, from talking to a lot of musicians, that there's this idea that negative emotion is what drives great music. There's no good music without negative feelings. So I've read stories of people breaking up with their loved one so they could write a wonderful song, or they need to feel bad. They need to feel bad so that they can write good music. If they're not depressed, if they're not going through a crisis, like, how are they going to write great music? And I feel like this is one of those. This is something that's close to my heart, because this idea of the troubled artist, or there's a word for it, but there's a specific phrase for it, but like the artist who is just the troubled artist, basically. That's the only way to great art. And there's a great, I think it was the book on what's it's a form of trauma therapy. It's oh my god, it's where you like regress back, but you stay. It's kind of you guys, I think, took from this idea and combined it, and Grant talks about it, how you guys combined it. But going back and looking at yourself through your eyes and actually seeing that, traumatic, I can't remember, but that book talks about this idea of this myth, and how it really is a myth, because the healthier you are, the more creative you are. In fact, sometimes being depressed or anxious or overwhelmed or burnt out, like you're saying, actually hinders a lot of creative work. And this goes not just from writing music or painting, but there's a lot of creative work that is outside of the arts, just coming up with solutions, engineering, a lot of things, it's a part of the mind. Being creative isn't just for art, it's for solutions and doing so many things. And I find this very important in relation to art and creativity and trauma.
You know what? That's an interesting aspect, because I actually have seen a couple of artists that are solely using their art as a therapy for themselves to work through their stuff.
Yeah.
And behind that is actually the belief, if they didn't have any more stuff, then their art would be gone, basically.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I know somebody who's using the ability to see these early events in life and the developmental process on a very different scale, to create images and pictures that are just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's probably, for what we know, the development is also accompanied by almost something like a music, like a dance or something. You can really feel that on a auditory level. And I think that is also where great music can be created.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure some of the biggest composers that we still have listened to today, I think they had access to that part of reality. Yeah.
Wow.
I like that very much, because there's a famous movie series where they talk about the Force and the dark side of the Force. So what if using these emotions, these traumas, as motivators, as a negative force to create? And how about using the light, love side of the Force? Okay, what Inka is telling, getting rid of your traumas and switching your innate human creativity on, and create from that point of view. I'm not sure if that's true, but when I just listened to Inga, that just came into my mind, that there's always these two, good and bad, and I think creativity is much greater when you let it flow, when you're not depressed, when you're not using these emotions. But I know, and also especially in country music, they use these scenes when somebody has died or you lost your partner or something, that they use that to create country music and to process their pain. And for other people, it might be helpful to hear also that other people have that pain, and this might be also some sort of therapy where we basically close the loop. To feel is to heal, right? Because other people listen to the pain of others, or see the picture that some other people created in pain, and then they say, "Oh, this person also has pain, so pain isn't that bad."
Yeah,
and
that's
that
also true.
Basically, initiates the healing journey, but it's not actually healing it.
Okay.
So many levels.
Forgive me. I have a bit of a sarcastic view on that. Like, let's suffer together. I don't know if that's really the be all and end all. I would rather like to take measures to just have more of a happy time.
Sure, absolutely. But I kind of agree with.
I'm aiming for the happy time.
Yeah, absolutely. I see it as you guys have kind of the theme of this has been, there's levels, and we all got to start somewhere, right? So, we're all on different paths. Hopefully, we are kind of aiming. This talk is kind of about going towards being on the same journey, and maybe if you look, actually, I'm the one who's kind of like talking to you guys because I'm starting this journey in my own perspective, but you guys, are you guys are somewhere else. You guys are further along, and I think just like with trauma healing, there's many levels to it. You could see it as, if I'm writing something to express myself, maybe I'm not healing it, but I am getting awareness. And through this awareness, somebody else can understand that they can express how they feel because it's safe. But ultimately, you also want to build awareness that there's more than that. And at the same time, there's more to music than just staying or to painting or to whatever, than just using it to cope or using it to only express. So yeah, I think there's so many spectrums. And ultimately, I think there are just so many traumas we have that even if you're on a journey of healing, there's always more stuff you can write about. I don't think you'll ever run out of things to write about. So there's that,
This is really good, really important.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're never going to finish
just
it.
Just clearly regarding trauma, like, I have to stop healing because then I don't have enough to write about.
That's a song right there. Well, I think this would be a good way to end it for me. If you guys want to add something else, I think it's been a great chat. I think we've hit on a lot of underlying topics, and I'm very grateful for all the examples, all the discussions, and I think it's been a great chat.
Well, thanks very much. You made me stay longer than I had actually planned.
That's great.
I'm going to not have quite enough shut-eye that night, but that's fine.
Oh, not so great.
That's fine. It was a good trade-off, so thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you. Sergio, as always, thank you very much. We made our episode number 6, so I'm really happy. It was beautiful, these topics, and yes, so we'll continue the journey, and thank you, and have a beautiful afternoon.
Yeah, you too, guys. Inka, Daniel, sleep well, and have a great Saturday.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Be safe.
Bye-bye.